Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric Wolf and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 21 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today, we'll be speaking with John Mulcahy. John has packed a lot into 40 years, studying, observing, and participating in the tourism and hospitality industry as a student, employee, employer, owner, lecturer, and public servant, largely in Ireland, but also in the USA, the UK, and the Middle East. Welcome, John.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for having me on.
Welcome, John. We're so excited to speak with you today, and we can't wait to hear about how you set off on this journey. Would you mind sharing with us what inspired you to get into the food and tourism business?
I'm not sure what inspired me. Well, I suppose if I think about it, I had, at my younger life, I had traveled quite a bit because my father worked in the United Nations, and we were going and staying in hotels, staying in foreign countries, and I always liked the look of the people that were working in the hotels, where I thought they really had a dream job. Here they were surrounded by all these nice people in really nice surroundings with really nice food, and they got to work there every day. Of course, I was looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, but it certainly stayed with me from being a young kid to when I left school and I had to make up my mind. I got into a hotel school here in Ireland, Dublin College of Catering in Dublin, and that's where I started.
After that, what was the next adventure?
I spent a couple of years in hotels. I worked in Ashford Castle, which now is a Red Carnation hotel and is one of the top hotels in the world, I think, certainly in Europe. And I spent a season there. But I was young, I was chasing money, and I wanted to go outside of Ireland. And I decided to apply to the United Nations because that's where my dad worked. And I thought, okay, well, why don't we try and replicate that? So I applied, and the UN didn't come back for quite some time. And I decided I wanted to go to the Bright Lights of London. And I got a job in Duke's Hotel in London, which is a small, neat little cosmopolitan hotel behind the Ritz. And it was a favorite of actors and Hollywood actors and Arab sheikhs at the time. And I spent some time working there. And while I was there, what happened was I suddenly got a telegram in those days, or a telex as it was, and basically telling me to show up in Cairo in 3 days' time. Here's my ticket. I'm going to be paid a bucket load of money and to show up in Egypt. And that's what I did. I joined the UN for a 1-year contract just to see what it was like. And I was a catering manager as part of the United Nations peacekeeping force between Egypt and Israel along the Suez Canal. And there was a headquarters there, and we were feeding 18 different nationalities, military camp style, using military rations in a headquarters. And there would be about 2,500 people there in civilian mess, officers' mess, enlisted men's mess. And at the age of, I suppose, 22, 23, I was involved in running that, using local staff, using military equipment and so on, old military equipment, I'd have to say. I did that for a year, but realized very quickly that by being in the Middle East, I was cutting down my network of people within the tourism or the hotel or the hospitality industry. And actually, it wasn't for me. So I went back to the UK and got a job in a UK hotel down near Goodwood Racecourse in the south of England in Sussex, and spent about a year there while I tried to re-establish myself within the hotel and catering or hospitality business. And eventually I managed to get a job back in Ireland. And so I worked around Ireland for a while in catering companies. I ran my own pub, or my family bought a pub and I ran it, put in a restaurant. Worked in a gas rig off of Kinsale, which is offshore catering. I worked in educational catering until eventually I met somebody, Christine, who decided that my roaming days were over, and we got married, and that basically was that.
Now, John, tell us a little bit about the BMW motorbike story, because that was an important part of, I think, what happened to you after you left Egypt.
Yeah, in Egypt, there were various contingents there, and one of them was the Finnish contingent, and they had part of the Sinai Desert as their responsibility. But most of the soldiers in the Finnish contingent were people of my age, and I got on very well with them. And they figured out very quickly that by being in the UN, they were able to buy motorbikes and cars, but mostly motorbikes tax-free. And they'd buy the motorbikes, but they'd have them shipped in, and then they'd drive them around the Sinai for a while. Of course, there's nobody else in the Sinai except them, so they were having a bit of fun. I got very envious of this, and I decided I'd like a BMW. And I saw a picture in Time magazine, I remember, of this guy on a bike leaning into a corner in the sunset, hills behind him, obviously having great fun driving this bike. So I decided I'd buy a bike tax-free on my way home. I had lots of money. I was young and foolish, so I bought the bike. I never thought for a moment what I'd do with the bike or what I was going to do with it. So I arrived into Centre Hyde Park in London, where BMW have their tax-free showrooms. I arrived in and said, "I'm here to collect my bike." This very British gentleman said, "Fine, sir, let's bring you downstairs." He brought me to the bike, handed me the keys, and said, "There you are. Thank you very much. Bye-bye." And I said, "Well, it was a small problem. I don't know how to drive it." And he was quite incredulous. He didn't really quite know what to do. And he was more or less forced, for lack of reaction, to say, "Okay, well, like, how much do you not know? What is that?" And I said, "I've never ridden a bike before in my life. And I need to learn how to drive it because I have to drive from here up through England and get it home to Ireland." I'm sure he thought maybe I was drunk, or maybe I was high on drugs or something. But he, in fairness to him, he spent an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours with me on the back lane behind the BMW showroom, showing me the gears, showing me the clutch, showing me how to drive it. And after 2 hours, I headed off into Hyde Park Corner, one of the worst traffic zones in the world, I think, and drove the bike. Well, I didn't drive the bike all the way home. I decided at this stage, I had decided, well, there was no way I was going to be able to drive it home. So I drove it to Euston Station and drove it into Euston Station and bought myself a ticket on the train to Holyhead, which is up in Wales. It's the ferry port to get across to Dublin. Again, I met a porter who basically pointed to one of the wagons on the train and said, "Just drive it up that plank there and put it into the wagon." I said, "I can't." And he looked at me and didn't believe it. And I said, "But would you like to do it?" And he's looking at a brand new BMW bike with fairing and so on it, all the kit on it. And he was overjoyed. So he promptly hopped up on the bike and drove it up the plank and put it into the carriage. But then I had to change trains in Crewe in those days, and I had to do the same thing in reverse. And again, I met a young guy, 19-year-old porter, at 2:00 in the morning, and he was delighted to drive the bike off the train and back on. Eventually, I got home to Dublin. I had to drive the bike then myself through Dublin and down to County Kildare, which is about an hour's drive outside of Dublin. And I eventually got home, and I spent the next couple of months learning how to drive the bike, and I really grew to love it. In fact, now at 62, I'm seriously thinking of going and get another BMW bike, much to my wife's chagrin, I'd have to say.
Have your bike riding skills improved?
I'm not sure. I haven't been on a bike since about 1988, just before I got married. So I guess it's pretty much like riding a bicycle. Once you know, you can always go back to it.
Well, clearly the BMW advertising worked on you, John. They made a sale off of you.
Oh, you can bet on it, definitely.
What did you learn from that whole experience? Was there a life lesson there to be had?
There was a life lesson. I definitely learned that if you want to move on out of these things, you've got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And okay, I made my own problem, but I learned a huge amount about myself, about my ability to just get on with it. You know, the alternative was, I suppose, to turn around to the guy in the BMW showroom and say, "Fine, put it in a crate and send it home. I'm getting a taxi and I'm going to Heathrow." I had the money to do that, and I didn't. I decided this is a bit of adventure. Why not? And so I think the life learning thing there is, don't be afraid. You can't be reckless and go off and do things, but certainly to weigh up the options. And more often than not, you'll surprise yourself and everybody else around you what you can do. The compliment to me was about 2 or 3 months after I got home. My friends, my parents, my brother, they were all saying, you know what, you should stay on the bike. You're a far better driver on the bike than you ever were in a car. And for my mother to be turning around and telling me I was a safe driver on a bike was something else. And so that's the lesson. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Speaking of life lessons, John, we typically ask our guests about a eureka moment in their lives, and what you had mentioned was really interesting about figuring out one of your strengths and your skills. So would you be able to share with us a little bit more about your time working as a hotel manager in the UK and what you
Sure.
realized as your strongest skill then?
Yes, I came home to, I got a job as I said, in West Sussex in a hotel there. It was a style of hotel that I hadn't worked in before. Most of the hotels I had worked in had been 5-star and so on. This was an ordinary 3 or 4-star hotel with about 60 rooms. There was a Maltese manager there. I was the assistant manager, small number of staff, 2 or 3 people in the dining room and 2 or 3 people in reception. So it was very much a type of place where it was all hands on deck. As an assistant manager, you didn't wear your 3-piece suit and wander around all day rolling your keys in your hand. And so it was very much hands on. And part of that was you had to work Christmas, and there was a Christmas package offered to people where they could come in on Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas, a couple of days before Christmas, and then stay right through to New Year's. Most people arrived in a couple of days before Christmas and went home after what's known as Boxing Day or St. Stephen's Day, a couple of days after Christmas Day. So they're there for about a week maybe. So you had the same guests for the week, and they were there on half board really. They were there for breakfast and they were there for dinner. They might go out during the day and visit Chichester or whatever towns were nearby. And your ability to handle guests needed to be really, really sharp. Because it's one thing having a businessman coming in for an evening, he has dinner, he has breakfast, and he's gone. And the interaction time is very short. Here you've got people that are with you for 7 days. You get to know them, they get to know you, you get to know their likes and dislikes. And I discovered that, especially at Christmas time too, that Christmas can be a stressful time, stressful working, but even as a family, if you're with your family, maybe you're not with them all year round, then suddenly you're all thrown together. That can be stressful for the family, or maybe aunts and uncles don't get on, or sons and daughters don't get on, or whatever. But I found that I absolutely thrived in that environment where I got to know them. I got to know what the little politics were going on within the families between guests. And I found that through my personality and through my ability to problem solve and be part of the solution, not the problem, they really enjoyed their Christmas. And because they really enjoyed their Christmas, I enjoyed the Christmas. It clicked with me. I was really, really good with that. And I helped create an environment where they enjoy themselves, and they forgot about maybe some of the minor difficulties maybe that might be around the table at a stressful time like Christmas. So for me, once I realized that and I got confidence out of that, I thought, you know what, I'm good at this. And I learned that later on when I ran a restaurant, ran a pub. And as you get older, you learn it doesn't have to be in a hospitality environment. It actually applies to every interaction that you have every day, whether you're a customer yourself, or whether you're providing a service, or you're leading a team, or you're working with an association part-time of people that have a common interest. It doesn't matter. Those skills, they're life skills that are so valuable and worth nurturing and keeping.
Absolutely. They're one of the most understated skills as well that are incredibly important, like you said, in any sector of life.
I think so. And I sometimes worry about it a little bit today that people in our industry, in the hospitality industry, are young people particularly, are afraid to go in there because they think they don't have the skills. And that worries me greatly, because if we don't have people coming in willing to learn, the hospitality industry isn't necessarily about the skill of carrying a plate or pouring a drink or filling out a form. It's actually the skill of getting on with people. And if If we don't manage to get to pass those skills on to the new people coming into the industry, we won't have an industry. So for me, it's the big issue. And perhaps we'll talk about that later, but I'm really worried about that.
So, John, it's interesting you talk about skills and training, and at that point in your career, you definitely knew that hospitality was in your blood. But then shortly after that, you went into training and hotel management. So, was it the desire to do something about those skills training that took you down that path in education?
No, Eric, it was serendipity. It was a pure chance. It was one of those moments in life when you can turn right or you can turn left. And I turned right. And what happened was, as I said earlier, I had met my future partner in life, Christine. We had decided to get married. She was a catering manager with the food service company that I was working with. When we decided to get married, I discovered that the banks, in Ireland, traditionally, when you get married, you get a deposit, you go off and buy a house, you get a mortgage, 20 or 30-year mortgage, and you get yourself in the housing ladder. When I went to go and get a mortgage as a hotel manager, I discovered that Irish banks didn't consider a catering job or a hospitality job to be secure enough to give me a mortgage. So I had to go find a proper job. And at the time, the state agency for training people for the hospitality and catering industry in Ireland, it was called CERT, were recruiting people. And I decided to go along for no other reason that it was going to be a job that would help me get my mortgage. And once I got the mortgage, then, I'd forget about it and go back to the hotel industry. I managed, after 7 interviews, mind you, I eventually got the job on a 1-year fixed term contract. And I discovered, to my amazement, that I actually had 15 years worth of experience that I could now pass on to people through training in CERT. And at the times, CERT were training thousands of people every year through various colleges around Ireland. And I discovered quite serendipitously that I had these skills. And you know what? I was good at dealing with young people. Again, those social skills, those hospitality skills were really good, served me well in terms of meeting young people, getting them to come in the courses, monitoring them through college, getting them a placement at the end of college, and then making sure that they got on in that place, then hopefully stayed in the industry. I started a 1-year fixed term contract, and 20 years later, I was still there.
John, it's clear you've had so many incredible life experiences. Thinking back, if you could have given yourself a single piece of advice, what would you have told yourself?
As I said earlier, I was very conscious that when I was in the hotel industry, I think I made a mistake early on in that I was in the hotel industry, I was at the right level, I was in good hotels, and I chased the money. I chased the money by going to the UN. The UN offered me a job which increased my salary by, I think it was 3 or 4 times. I can't remember the exact amount, but certainly I just couldn't believe that these guys were willing to pay me this much money on a regular basis doing what I do. And so I left the catering industry. Well, I left the hotel management industry. So I followed the money. And I often wonder, if I haven't followed the money and stayed with the industry that I loved, I clearly liked it at that point, what would have happened? How else would this have turned out? But you know what? It came around full circle anyway. And I ended up with a really interesting mix of experiences. But certainly to my own kids, or to young people that I've talked to, or anybody that wants to hear my opinion, I've always said to them, don't follow the money. Follow your heart and your gut, and the money will follow afterwards. Because if you like what you're doing, and if you're jumping out of bed in the morning because you like what you're doing, then the money and all the other good things that come with liking what you're doing are going to arrive anyway. Yeah, it might take a little bit longer, but follow the money. You're not going to be happy, because you'll be getting out of bed in the morning and saying, why am I doing this job? Oh yeah, because I'm getting paid very well. So that means I can go on this really nice holiday for 3 weeks of the year. And then for the other 49 of the weeks of the year, you're not happy. It just doesn't make sense.
John, have your 2 sons followed your advice then?
They have, in a way. One of them did actually for a couple of years and did his own thing. And then a consultancy company came looking for him, and he went with it, but he didn't go with it for the money. He went with it because they wanted to do data management, and he's into data management or big data. So he went with that. The other guy is not following the money, but he's living in Berlin, and he's now about 24. And I know he's looking at me thinking, Dad, when's the money going to come now? I'm at this 4 years. I mean, really? So I'm under pressure on that one, I'd have to say.
John, what's next for you now? Where are you in your career, and what are your plans for the next few years?
Well, it goes back to the follow your heart, follow your gut bit. I was coming up to retirement. And as I said earlier, I'm 62. So a couple of years ago, I began thinking, do I want to stay in a public service organisation in Ireland, working on policy and strategy, food tourism strategy, education strategy, and so on? And I realized that I was getting to the point that I was watching other friends and colleagues leave, hanging on for dear life until 65 and then leaving, and then not being very well after that, in some cases. And I thought, you know what, I want to stay in this business, or I want to stay doing what I'm doing, but I want to do it from a different perspective. So I made the decision to leave Fáilte Ireland if I could make the numbers stack up, pay off the mortgage, make sure I had enough money to live on, and so on. I was able to do that at the end of 2017. So I left Fáilte Ireland at that point, and I took a little bit of time to think. I'd been thinking for a while, but I further time to think about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, and see what kind of things would pop up, what fate would throw me. Over the past number of years, I'd been publishing academically. I was publishing in academic books, a chapter here, a chapter there. I'd been invited to write about what I'd been doing in food tourism, specifically in food tourism, but also at that point where food tourism and education meet. And through those publications, they were getting some recognition, and I know somebody here in the education side of things in Ireland, and he turned around to me one day and he said, "You know what, John, you have a lot of chapters published now. Why don't you consider doing a PhD and using the chapters that you've done to write a PhD about what you've done in 10 years around food tourism in Ireland?" So that's what I've decided to do. I'm writing an autoethnographic account of my work designing and promoting and acting as the architect of food tourism in public policy in Ireland basically from 2007 to now. And autoethnographic means that essentially I'm telling the story. It's me recounting what I did, why I did it, when I did it, how I reacted to changes in policy, in the wider policy environment, changes in government, changes. As you probably know, we had a pretty rough recession here from 2007 onwards, so there wasn't any resources available. Money was very, very tight. People were let go, and so on. So, it wasn't exactly the time to start off with food tourism or gastronomy tourism or culinary tourism, whatever phrase resonates. So that's what I've been doing. I've also been asked to put together a book on Irish food, which is a lot of people ask me, well, what is Irish food? And sometimes I'm stumped for an answer. It's kind of more than Irish coffee and Irish stew and brown bread. So I've been trying to gather all of the references that I found over 10 years into one place about what Irish food is, our ingredients, some of the traditional stuff that might have died off, and so on, and try and bring this together in a book. I've been working with Eric's very kindly invited me along to one or two events where I get to talk about this and about our journey, about culinary tourism or food tourism. I've been doing that as well. And I'm really kind of working on this idea that I can bring some knowledge and insight to people who are developing public policy around tourism, especially around gastronomic tourism or food tourism, and trying to make that link for them between food tourism, educating people to work in the industry and making those two things work.
John, you sound like one of those people who has more than 24 hours in their day. How are you doing all of this?
I'm a procrastinator, I'd have to be honest. I'm great at deadlines. If I'm told to have it in by May 17th, I'll be up till 3:00 in the morning on May 16th doing it. And you can't do that with a PhD, I realize. But no, I enjoy it, and I do a little bit every day. I spend a couple of hours doing the entries for my book, and another couple of hours doing an aspect of the PhD, writing up a little bit about that. The next 2 weeks of this month now is going to be traveling. So all of that is going to take a sidestep. I'm going to a conference in Lille, an academic conference in Lille, to talk about food tourism and education next week. I'm external examiner for a hotel college, which is affiliated to National University of Ireland, based in Galway. And I'm acting as external examiner for them for their college in the Seychelles, the hotel management college in Seychelles. So I'm going there for a week, which sounds great, but I don't think I'm going to be lying on the beach. So I'll be spending a bit of time, I think, working on my laptop when I'm there as well. So, but look, as I said earlier, if you like these things, you like what you do, time is not the issue. Time is probably the issue, that you don't have enough time to get in as much as you want. But if you like doing this stuff, I jump out of bed in the morning. I'm not sitting in bed till 11 o'clock in the morning and then have a nice leisurely breakfast over the Irish Times and a nice cup of coffee and some sourdough bread. I'm out of bed at 7:30 and I'm at the computer by 8, and I'm probably still there at 8 o'clock that night.
Speaking of time, John, you spent the largest part of your career working for Filta Ireland. How did that constrain or enhance your ability to follow your passion with food tourism? Because obviously working with a governmental agency, sometimes there's great benefits and other times it can be a real constraint.
Absolutely right, Eric. It can be a real constraint in terms of policy or change of minister or a change of government, lack of funds, a different chief executive. I think that's really an important point, because I was so focused on it because I'd been working in that sort of area. And by area, I mean in a public organization. I fundamentally understood the nuts and bolts of how it worked. I understand the politics of it with little p and big P, little politics and big politics. I worked off the principle sometimes, and I know I drove people mad, and I certainly drove my chief executive mad. I would sometimes I wouldn't ask for permission. I'd ask for forgiveness. Go do it.
Best way to do it. Best way to do it.
And sometimes you'd have to ask for permission. Sometimes I needed, a couple of 100,000 to do something. But, in a way, I backed them into it. When I identified back in 2005, actually, I think you came in to see me, Eric, around about then, the early 2000s. You showed up and we had a meeting, and you didn't know me at that stage. I didn't know you. And we were talking about this. I got to do the meeting for some reason, and probably because I was on the education side of things in Fáilte Ireland. And I realized that food tourism was coming down the track. I didn't know when it was going to arrive, but I knew it was going to be a thing, and I understood why. I understood that it was something that could ripple out to all areas of the economy and could service the needs of the state, needs of the industry, needs of people really, really well. So in 2007, I asked the organization to fund me to do an online master's in gastronomy with the University of Adelaide. And by 2010, my dissertation was on establishing food tourism in Ireland as a viable economic activity. And within a year of bringing that dissertation back in, my colleagues had recognized that, maybe John does know what he's talking about. And within a year, we had our first strategy out, and that's where it started. Once I got that going, and luckily at that stage, in fairness to Sean Quinn, the CEO, he recognized it as well, and he actually allowed me to set up a food tourism unit. Once I had a food tourism unit, then understanding the politics and the way government works, I had a unit, therefore I could get budget. If I had budget, I could do things. If I could do things, now you could make a difference. And once you could do things, that's where you sometimes went for permission, sometimes you went for forgiveness. And so I managed to do that for 10 years, and that's how I did it.
Was it a dream job? Were you excited to finally fall into that job, or did it just kind of happen and you saw where it went?
It evolved, Eric. I didn't realize I was getting on such a fun train, to be honest with you. I just recognized that I liked food, I liked education, I liked being in a state agency where there's stuff coming across your desk on a national basis, and I could see what was going on. My difficulty was I couldn't see what was happening on the ground, and I had to resolve that problem. But no, about halfway in it, when I began to see the fruits of my work, when I went back and read my dissertation and saw what I suggested, and then saw that actually I had made some of those things happen. Then I realized, you know what, John, you've hit the gold vein here. You really have. We got to find ways just to keep this going and to try and spread it out. I needed to get other people involved, and that's what I did. It took a while. Certainly, it was an evolution rather than the Big Bang.
Nice.
John, as we wrap up here, we'd love to hear about your favorite food travel memory.
Oh, Lordy. Well, my favorite one, I suppose, is as a kid. Again, I was traveling. Dad was in the Middle East. He was in India and Pakistan. No, was this? Yeah, I think he was in India and Pakistan at the time. I was about 10, maybe 11. And at the time, there was no international school where Dad was posted. So I was sent home to school. And so the UN then would fly you out once or twice a year to rejoin your family. These were the days where you dressed up in a suit to get on a plane. There was no Ryanair these days. You had to act very properly in that. And so I was wearing my school uniform, my school hat, and you'd be picked up by an air hostess. You'd get this big label around your neck, and you would be basically sent by the air hostess. You just do what you're told. So normally the journey was Dublin to Heathrow, to Geneva, to Athens, to Jerusalem, or Tel Aviv maybe, or Damascus, or someplace like that. And I learned very fast that the place to go to was Geneva, because in Geneva, there was this really nice restaurant at the top of the airport building. And this was a full service restaurant, a proper maitre d' with a 3-piece suit, black suit, tablecloths on the tables, the whole thing. I had learned a little bit through the previous occasion that the air hostess would turn around to me and said, well, John, what would you like? And I would say, well, I'd like to have dinner. And then she'd bring me usually to the cafe. On this particular occasion, I said, actually, I'd love dinner, but could we go upstairs? And she looked at me and said, okay, fine. So we went upstairs. She handed me over to the maitre d'. Maitre d' kind of looked up and down and thought, okay. And really professional, sat me at a table where I could see the airfield out through the window. I could see all the planes coming and going on all the little trucks and everything else. And he asked me what I wanted. And I said, I'd love some spaghetti bolognese. And he went off and got me spaghetti bolognese, but brought it back in a trolley, old style trolley with a flambe lamp, a flambe dish. And he finished the spaghetti bolognese by my side at the table. And then silver served to me and so on, asked me what I'd like to drink, suggested I'd perhaps like a bottle of 7-Up with my spaghetti bolognese. Would I like some Parmesan? Would I like some cracked black pepper? I was in heaven. I couldn't believe. I just thought, if this is what dinner is like, I'm for it. Thank you very much. And I'm eternally grateful to that maitre d'. He could have been very pompous and just thrown me in the back room somewhere, but he treated me like a normal customer. I don't know who paid for it. I'm sure maybe the UN paid for it or the airline paid for it, but I had a most marvelous, about an hour having my spaghetti bolognese and 7-Up followed by ice cream. And it was just a stupendous moment.
Did you ever think that somebody would have as their favorite food travel memory a meal at an airport?
I don't think you'd be able to do that now, would you? I'm not sure you'd get that kind of service in an airport anymore. But
I can just see the John, the Irish boy, 10 years old, in his school uniform, having fine dining. I love it. It's a great visual, John. Any photos from back then?
Oh gosh, no, golly, no. Going to say, as we all got older, there was a lot of UN people, Irish people in the UN, and there was a lot of kids as the year went by. And 10 years later, when we were all about, 18, 19, we were actually, I think, banned from Brussels airport because this brat pack of kids would show up, UN kids would show up, all from Ireland, and we'd all end up at the same time, and the poor airlines couldn't handle it. And normally we'd be put into a room and told, stay there, and we'll be back in 3 hours for you. So days of tableside cookery and 7-Up and nice food were long gone at that stage.
I love it. John, you must have a quote that has inspired you, maybe from someone else. What would that quote be?
The quote is a John Keats quote in a sonnet by him, which basically is, there is a budding morrow in midnight. So it's basically like there's a silver lining in every dark cloud. At midnight, actually tomorrow is on the way. It's just beginning to come. And I love that image. I love that picture where at times when things look most dark, actually there's a sunrise on the way. And if you just hang in there, you just be there, you're going to see that sunrise, which, as we all know, a sunrise is absolutely stunning and is worth waiting for. So that's why I like
wonderful, John. Do you have a quote you're known for?
I don't know if I'm known for it, but it's one I kind of live by, and it may be against everything that I've said, but it's something I picked up from a charity book or something. And it's love many, trust few, always paddle your own canoe. So I love lots of people, but I'm not sure I trust that many people. So
I like it. Well, John, one of the common themes I've heard in our conversation today, it sounds like you're truly proud to be Irish. And I understand that you have a favorite book about Irish cooking.
I do. It's Doreen Allen's book, which is Irish Traditional Cookery. Doreen is one of our major chefs here. And she's more than a chef. It's a dynasty. Her mother-in-law started it in Ballymaloe down in County Cork.
Mm-hmm.
They have a cookery school. They have a hotel. They have their own farm. Myrtle Allen actually started country house cooking in the 60s when nobody else was doing it. She's the original of the species in terms of food in Ireland. As I say, her daughter-in-law, Dorina, published this book. And Dorina has, because she's so well known in Ireland, people have been sending her memories about food and receipt books of their grandmothers and so on. And she's collated all this information into a book called Irish Traditional Cooking. And if you want to find out a little bit about or get stories about Irish food and more than the Irish coffee and the bacon and cabbage, that's my favorite book. I think it's a tremendous book.
John, you had mentioned Irish cooking and writing a book on the gastronomy there. Do you have a favorite Irish dish that you love?
Ooh, no, I'm not sure I have a favorite. I do. I mean, these days I think it's not about an Irish food, but it's about our ingredients. I think our ingredients are, I'm biased perhaps, but they're second to none. Our beef, our lamb, our pork, our butter, our bread, our vegetables, our seafood, our seaweeds even. I love the simple things. I mean, a good, well-made Irish stew, very simple Irish stew with good ingredients, you just can't beat it.
What about a favorite non-Irish dish?
A non-Irish dish is steak Diane. I learned tableside cookery when I was in college years and years ago. And then when I was in that hotel in Sussex, there was a guy there called Philip. He was an old style waiter who loved, I remember, Shirley Bassey, and he'd go around the restaurant cooking steak Diane and Irish coffee and soul on the bone, tableside, singing Shirley Bassey songs. I'm not sure how great that went down with the customers, but anyway, he was part of the furniture. And he showed me how to cook steak Diane. I like cooking steak Diane. It's dead simple. It's just a very tender piece of beef with some mushrooms, finely chopped mushrooms, onions, and tomato concassé, and you flambe it. The steak has some French mustard on it, and you cook your veg, then your steak, and flambe it. And I think it is the standout dish of the world. Done properly, with a little bit of theatre and a little bit of flames, people standing around the cooker as you're doing it, it generates conversation for the night. And then match that with a bottle of Chateau Leoville Barton from Bordeaux. And of course, Barton is an Irish name, which is why I pick it. Steak Diane with a bottle of Chateau Leoville Barton, about 10 or 15 years old. I'm in heaven.
Well, John, I'll be over in about an hour.
No problem, Eric. Anytime.
Short flight. I look forward to it. Nice.
I'm really conscious that sustainability of food tourism or culinary tourism, whatever it is you want to call it, is really dependent on that source of people being able to work in the business and providing those experiences. And if the people that are listening to this, they need to consider that, I think. I'm sure they are, but I think they're so busy thinking about providing the experience in terms of the mechanics of the experience, of making sure that they've gone into partnership with another business to help them do that, or finding the business, or marketing it, or getting the right brochure. All of it comes to nothing if the staff, if the people that you're working with that are meeting the guests, if those staff members are not able to spontaneously and joyfully provide that extra bit that makes that experience, then we're all in trouble. Hospitality and tourism is no different than any other industry around the world. Everybody is on the ropes looking for talent and looking, not even just talent, just looking for manpower to actually run the business or operate the business.
John, you use the word experience, and I think that's absolutely essential for our listeners to absorb and understand, because so many people are concerned about developing a product, but really they should be thinking about developing the experience.
Absolutely. That's it precisely. And while the experience can be the product, if you get too wrapped up in thinking in terms of product, it's got to be in terms of the experience. And frequently it doesn't cost anything. It's a smile. You don't have to buy stuff for it. Just the right person delivering that with the right smile. They don't even have to have the skills. I remember some years ago talking to somebody that came over here. They were a speaker for a conference. I had sent them somewhere. And this was during the Celtic Tiger. And when they came back and I met them, I said, well, what struck you most? And they said, you know what, John, you've got to be really careful. Some places that I went, there were people there who sometimes weren't Irish. And I didn't mind that. But they were unable to approach the table or approach the experience in a way that made me confident that I was going to enjoy it. And yet they were highly skilled. And she said, the experiences that I remember most is, in fact, one particular girl who was there on her summer job. It was her first couple of days. She was really nervous. She didn't know the products. She didn't know how to bring it to the table. But her personality was stunning. I enjoyed her experience, the experience of having her bring my drink to the table with a glowing smile and a real honesty and a personality. And she said that made my day. Now, that's what matters. It's that ability to deliver that without getting hung up on having the correct skills or serving from the right or picking up from the left at table or whatever it is.
It's a great story. Well, John, that was really fascinating, especially the vision of the 10-year-old Irish boy at the Geneva airport having fine dining. I really love that. John, it's always fantastic to hear your words of wisdom. You are so passionate about what you do. You have so much experience, and we really would like to thank you for sharing your experience with our audience today. You have so much knowledge to share, and we truly appreciate your gift. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Eric. I really appreciate it. It's been really good to talk to both yourself and Ashi. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. We empower local communities and businesses with the food and beverage tourism knowledge and tools needed to reach new consumers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, every year we shepherd a community of almost 100,000 professionals in over 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.